Hello there, and welcome to the Meaningful Stitch. This is episode 40, and I'm Amy Palco, and I'm coming to you from Edinburgh, Scotland. And this is the place where I like to share my knitting practice and my knitting projects. If you are new here, then thank you so much for checking me out. Please do consider subscribing if you like what you find. And if you're returning, then you might find that the format of this episode is a little different from the ones that have preceded it. And this is because I want to experiment with something over this summer. I want to try slightly less formal episodes and trying to post a little bit more often. So we're going to start today with a kind of a casual catch-up. So I've got my knitting. I will tell you more about what's on my needles just shortly. And I'm going to do a bit of a whip roundup because I have quite a lot of works in progress and I have very little in the way of finished objects. So what I would like to do is just spend a little time with you today and work through what's in these project bags all around my feet, basically. So you might have watched my most recent episode, which I recorded with my mum when I was over in France. And there we basically recapped what my mum had knitted over the course of 2023 so far. What you didn't see was that was all my whips, basically, because obviously I didn't take them all to France with me. So I thought, even although it's only been a few days since the last episode went up, episode 39, I thought I would take some time to do that with you today. And then moving forward, just make it more of a summer of casual catch-ups. Make it a bit more easy, a bit more gentle, a bit more kind. And just see where we go without too many expectations. So if you would like to make sure that you join me for all of those and you're not subscribed, then please do hit that subscribe button just so you don't miss out on anything, because I haven't completely decided whether we're going to work to a more regular schedule or whether these are going to be more kind of ad hoc episodes. But like I said, we'll take it one day at a time, 1 week at a time, 1 month at a time, and see where we end up. So to begin with, I'm going to just tell you what I'm wearing, because actually it is my only finished object. It is the Saturday Shrug, and it is by Jackie Rose of the Caddy Jacks Knits podcast. Now, I think when I shared this with you in episode 38, I think I was just up to this point here. So basically what I was doing was I went through my stash and I found all of these DK weight yarns, and I laid them all out and I kind of created a fade. So in some instances I would be holding 2 strands of the same yarn double, and then I would switch one out and introduce a new colour and then hold 2 strands of that new colour together before doing the same thing. And that's how I worked through the whole shrug. The shrug is a free pattern, and it is 1 by 1 rib. Now, I kind of experimented with my first Saturday Shrug, if you remember. I knitted it in some beautiful hand spun by Ivana of the Republic of Me podcast, and she very generously spun it up and sent it to me. What an incredible gift. And I'm so glad that I knitted it up into the Saturday Shrug, because Jackie is such a dear friend as well. So I feel as though I've got a beautiful hug that's been made by 2 dear friends, and that's a beautiful thing. I'm really pleased with that, and I'm really pleased with this new one too. It is super snug and cozy. Most of the yarn is actually leftovers from Drops Nepal. That's right, isn't it? No, Drops Lima, and I think there's some Drops Charisma in there as well. The Drops Lima is their alpaca wool blend, and their Drops Charisma is 100% wool. And I have quite a lot of that in my stash. I have quite a lot of Drops yarn in general in my stash. I think it's a very decent workhorse yarn. I think it's very reasonably priced. I did check out their ethical policy on their website, and I felt quite satisfied with that. Maybe there's other people with different information on that and they feel differently about that, but I did do some of my research and I felt comfortable knitting with it and moving forward with it. The fibre is lovely. They have a really good range of colours, Not as good. Well, I think actually they've introduced a few new colours to kind of broaden the range of the Drops Flora, which is their 60%, 40% alpaca wool blend in the 4-ply weight. I felt as though the colour range wasn't as good in that, but they have started to introduce some more new colours, which is good because that's a lovely yarn. So yes, basically I went through my stash and I picked out the Drops DK that I had and started working through it. The only exceptions are as we come up to the top here. So everything up to here, from the navy to the grape, to the ruby red, to the red, to the rust mix. And then here we have this kind of speckled yarn, and that is Brigantia, and that's in the colourway Pomegranate. And I actually picked that up on a craft de-stash that we did as part of my knit night. I think at a Christmas night out actually. And unfortunately Brigantia is no longer producing, so that's not available anymore. So I still have a little bit of that left in my stash. And then coming up to here, well, this is some leftovers of Cascade 220, and it's in the colourway Pickled Ginger. Oh my goodness, I cannot believe I remembered that, because that is some yarn I bought to go in Kingston the Second. If you remember Kingston the Second from way back, possibly episode 2. I had knitted the Kingston in a really lovely mixture of yarns, and I had ridiculously felted it. So that original Kingston is now, well, the sleeve of that original Kingston is now my hot water bottle cover. But I bought similar colours in the Cascade from Wool Warehouse, which incidentally is where I buy my Drops yarn as well. And I knitted up a second Kingston, and I had a little bit left, so I've added that in here. And then this very top colour you might see is also replicated here, and that's because this is Lapland DK, which is a wonderful 100% lamb's wool yarn produced by Di Gilpin, who's based over in Fife, which I can see from looking outside of my window, which is very cool. Across the water to Fife. So yes, I've just finished it off with like a few rows here and then my cast off. And the reason why I did that is actually because of what I have on underneath, which is, and I will just show this to you, which is this. And this is my Corran Cardigan. It's a new pattern by Rebecca Clow of the Creabea podcast. She brought it out, I think, in April, so last month. I was very fortunate to be one of the test knitters. Me and quite a few of our friends from Knit Night knitted it as part of the test knit. And so when Rebecca was preparing to, do the release and she needed some photographs taken, then we all met up in the old town in Edinburgh with a wonderful photographer called Yasmin Bauer. And she took some really fun photographs, and we had such a great day. Actually, it was really good fun, and then we all went for coffees afterwards and sat and knitted, and it was just such a delightful time. So as you'll see from the photographs maybe that I've popped up, you'll see that we all knitted our Corran cardigans in a range of beautiful rainbow colours. So it was really lovely to see all of those colours all together. But this is mine, and I've knitted it in the colourway Furze, which is a Scots word for gorse. So it's that yellow flower that you sometimes see growing on the sides of the hills in Scotland. And at the moment it is in full bloom on the hills in and around Edinburgh. So Arthur's Seat at the moment, you can see the gorse from miles and miles away. So there we go. It is a drop shoulder, so you'll see this. It's actually quite a simple construction, and the lace repeat is very easy to memorize. I had a little bit of difficulty figuring out where to position the armholes. However, for splitting for the sleeves, I think additional information has gone into the pattern since then. My buttons, I'll just come forward to show you because they're very lovely, are from Textile Garden, and I'm really pleased with them. They're a little bit funky, a little bit different from what I might have chosen otherwise, but I really like them. So, and I think I think they work well with the jumper, with the cardigan. So yeah, I'm really pleased with it. I think I do actually have yarn to knit another one, because Rebecca released this pattern with various different options. So I have knitted this as the round neck with the long sleeves, but you can also knit a short sleeved version, and there is also a V-neck version. So you can pick and mix to make their neckline and the sleeve length that works best for you. So I actually bought some more drops yarn, the Muscat this time, which is their DK cotton, and I think I bought it in the colour taupe, which, let's face it, I'm not really a taupe person, but this is a really lovely bronze colour, and with the cotton it almost looks metallic, which I really like. And I was thinking I might knit myself a short sleeve V-neck version, particularly for this summer, because I burn very easily. And so when we have very hot sun, and we are going to be going over to Europe, over to the continent this summer, and so I'm anticipating having a good degree more sun than I might have in Scotland, although I absolutely burn in Scotland as well, so that's so I do have to be careful. But having a little cover up, I think, would be ideal. So this won't be the only Corran in my future. The other thing is I have actually looked out the black DK, Super Soft DK by, it's a JC Rennie yarn, and I have some in charcoal, which you might remember from my Ilya by Caitlin Hunter that I knitted earlier this year. I still have quite a lot of that left. It was a very lovely gift from Ruth, from the Ruth Loves to Knit podcast. And so I think that I might knit myself another long-sleeved black Corran cardigan, but I will need to do that before October, because that is really when our light levels change quite dramatically, and then it becomes quite difficult to knit black yarn. So, but I'm going to pop this back on just now. There we go, because it's just given me a little bit of extra warmth, which apparently I need this morning. I am podcasting to you in the morning, quite early for me. I'm not really a morning person. I take quite a long time to warm up and wake up and be able to string a sentence together. It's not my natural forte upon waking. So, but I actually tried to record a podcast a couple of days ago, but I left it till quite late in the afternoon. And I found that I didn't have much fluency then either. And I also was interrupted several times by somebody doing some kind of garden work outside with a very loud and noisy motor. So that was rather frustrating. So rather than cobbling together the footage that I had with me being garbled, I decided that I would give this another go, and we would do it in the morning instead. So we'll see if this is any better. So fingers crossed. So there you go, that's what I'm wearing. The Corran cardigan and the the Saturday Shrug. I'm saying Friday Shrug because there are actually the Saturday Shrug, the Sunday Shrug and the Friday Shrug. And they're all free patterns, and they're different yarn weights. And the Friday Shrug has a really beautiful template for how to work a fade, which is really interesting too. So I recommend that you go and favourite those patterns in Ravelry if you use Ravelry, and that you cast one on, because they are such good fun and really allow you to kind of explore what's in your stash. You don't have to buy, yarn brand new, although you absolutely can, of course. I will never deny your right to buy more yarn. But I really liked being able to use some special yarn that was in my stash, and then to use up some scraps as well. So I really like this, because I like using scraps, because these different yarns that I've used are used in other pieces, and so then there's that ability to match it to some of the other garments that it'll be sitting on top of, just like this Corran cardigan. So there we go, that's what I'm wearing. The rest of the episode is going to be what's currently on my needles, which is quite funny, because I used to consider myself to be a monogamous knitter. It turns out, well, maybe I go through phases actually. Maybe it's not fair to say I'm no longer a monogamous knitter. Maybe I am actually just listening to the desire and the creative flow that's choosing to express through me in any given moment. So at the moment, I feel this real desire to just cast on more and more and more new things. And the result of that, of course, is that very little is coming through into completion. And I can feel some frustration for that because obviously I don't want to just keep casting on new things and not having any finished pieces at the end of it, because, you know, as much as I love the practice of knitting, and I really love the practice of knitting, I also want to be able to wear or to gift the pieces that I'm completing. So I am feeling into the edge around that, and you know, where my own desire for more cast-ons meets my desire for an actual finished object. So that's where I'm at. So I have, like I said, I've got quite a few things to show you. I think I might start with what you might have already seen, and then I'll show you some things that you haven't already seen, and then we'll finish off with a couple of things that are new to me, although there's not that much new to me, and then that should be, well, maybe just a few things of what's been bringing me joy, but we'll see how we go. Okay, so what have you already seen? Well, in episode 39, when I went over to France, I decided that I needed a project that I could put into my handbag and which could have wooden needles, which would be a relatively repetitive project but would still be engaging. So I'm an okay flyer. I'm not fantastic. I'm not one of these super relaxed people, which means that I want to have a project that is soothing but also requires some of my attention, because I find that when I get into a very anxious state, and I don't get into a super anxious state generally around flying, but if I am in a super anxious state, then I look for something which is going to occupy my brain. It's not enough just to have the soothing stitches of garter like this. It's not enough to have that. I need to have some additional stimulation. And so I was looking around for a project, and at that same time, the Knitting Posse podcast, they announced a new a new knit-along for Julie Hoover patterns. And I have never knitted a Julie Hoover pattern before, although I'm aware of her as a designer. And so I decided I was going to go and have a look through her portfolio on Ravelry and decide if there was a project there that could possibly meet my needs for this particular trip. And she has lots of beautiful patterns. So the knit along is being done in conjunction with Mayak, who are a producer of absolutely amazing, beautiful yarns. I'm hoping that when I get over to the States in October for Rhinebeck, that I get an opportunity to see some of their yarns in person. I think that would be lovely, because as far as I know, there are no stockists of Mayak in Scotland. Although I could be wrong, and if you know of one, let me know. And I'll go along for a squish. But but they are co-hosting this knit along with Mayak and with a yarn shop over in California called Monarch Knitting. Now, obviously, to get yarn delivered from Monarch, that would be a bit silly, because that's a very long way for me. But if you are in the States, then that would absolutely be an option for you to go and check out. But for me over here in the UK and in Edinburgh in particular, I decided that I would buy some yarn from my local yarn shop, which is Ginger Twist. And I was going to knit an accessory rather than a jumper, because of the portability of it. I was flying with Ryanair from Edinburgh over to Poitiers, and they have a policy. So I had a paid for priority, which allowed me to take a 10 kg cabin bag. And I could also take my handbag, but there are some restrictions around all of that. So my handbag's quite small, but I wanted to be able to put my project in my handbag. And yes, I know I could have taken a sock, but we'll get to that. So instead, I decided I was going to knit the Lucca scarf. Now, the Lucca scarf is a lace weight pattern, and so I popped into Ginger Twist and I picked up some of this yarn. And I showed this on episode 39 when I was with my mum, but I'll show it to you again because I've done a little bit of work on it since then because I have had another flight. So here we go, this is what I have. This is in Splendid Lace, which is a BFL silk blend from Ginger Twist, and this is in the colour Gorblimey. And oh Gorblimey, is it bright. I really, really love this. I have had in my head for a long time, because I am very familiar with Jessie's colours because I go into Ginger Twist a lot, and Jess of Ginger Twist has her own dye studio. So when you go into the shop, and it's a very small shop, but it's absolutely packed to the rafters, on the right hand side you have all of the brands, so different branded yarns, and on the left hand side you have all of Ginger's hand dyed. So you can see all the colour range there, and in all her different bases, and she has a lot of different bases, and they're all hung up so it's like a waterfall of colour. In fact, I'll tell you, when I got back from France on Thursday, by Saturday I was in need of some real colour therapy because it was so grey. We had a thick sea fog, which we call a haar, H-A-A-R. A haar had rolled in from the east coast and from the water, and it had just blanketed the whole of, well, certainly the whole of Edinburgh. But I live right at the harbour, which of course is right at the water, so it was, I think that's probably where it was the thickest. And I couldn't even see the water. If you've ever seen any of my photographs from my front window, you'll see that there's a very large mill that sits right beside the harbour, and you couldn't even see the mill on that Friday or Saturday. So I was in real need for some colour therapy, so I went in and basked in the rainbow, the yarn rainbow. But before I went, I did also pop in and I picked up this this skein of Gorblimey, because I had in my head that I wanted to use this really kind of luxe base in this very, very kind of vibrant shade and do kind of quite a classic design, so that there's a contrast there between the yarn base and design, both being quite sort of classic and luxe, with this like kind of very modern bright neon shade. And this is just ticking all the boxes for me on that score. So you can see that there are a range of travelling eyelets to create this design that moves across the fabric, and it's quite easy. Once you get the direction of travel, if you know what I mean, in your head, it's quite easy to follow. It's all charted. The charts are very small, and the symbols in the charts are very small. So when I first started to knit this, I was really struggling to see where I was meant to do knit two together and where I had to do a slip slip knit. So which direction my decreases need to go in. And so I took out my colouring pencils, which I haven't taken out in quite a while. And this is a set I've had since I was a teenager. So I took out my colouring pencils and I coloured in the bits, the charts, particularly the bits that showed me how to do this section here. And that actually really helped me to make sense of the pattern overall. And once I had probably done the second one here, I really had a much better sense of what it was that I was supposed to be doing. So this part here I pretty much did on my flights without having to look at the chart too much, which is good because you don't really want to keep referring to a chart when you're in travel. But as you can see, it's very fine work, it's very thin, and that's because it is this lace work. It does look a little bit, I don't know, lace always looks a little bit wonky before it's blocked. But the BFL silk base, I think, will block really, really beautifully. I'm really excited about this. I'm probably about a third of the way through, and to be honest, it knits up pretty quickly. And if I wasn't knitting on so many other projects, I probably would have made a lot more progress than I have, but that's where we're at. So there we go. The Knitting Posse and Julie Hoover and Mayak had a cast-on party for the Cal, and I'm going to pop the hashtag for the Cal in my notes, which you'll see in the description box below, and you'll also see fuller notes over on my Patreon, which is a freely accessible page, so you can go and check out some photos there and see things in a bit more clarity and depth. But I'll pop the hashtag in my notes so that you can go and check it out. But they had a cast-on party, and that was on the 22nd of April, and unfortunately I wasn't able to go to that because I was actually at my grandma's 90th birthday party, celebrating her birthday with the whole family. All 32 of us, we were having to spill over into the garden, and it wasn't very warm, so there was lots of blankets being passed around, and but it was so lovely to celebrate that with her. But I was home too late to join the cast-on party for the knit along. But I think there is a progress Zoom happening this weekend, so if you're interested, you should go and check that out. I think it's a lot of fun. So there we go, that's the Lucca scarf, and I really want to get that knitted up so that I have it at some point this summer, because again, I think it would work well as a cover up because it is light enough to do that. So yes, that's my hope. So like I said, you have already seen that one, and the other project that you've already seen from last episode is this one here, which I popped into this knitting bag, which you might remember because this is my Gran's knitting bag that I've inherited, and I used this fabric as the inspiration for my Stephen West MCAL for Shellography, which was the 2021 mystery knit along. So I bought a range of Holst Super Soft in colours that were gestured to by this fabric and inspired by this fabric, and so you probably have seen this bag before if you've watched this podcast before, but but this is what's inside the bag, and this is my Houef by Karen Cronje of Miss Lamotte Yarns, and I'm knitting it in the kit that was released from Miss Lamotte Yarns, which my mum surprised me with when I arrived in France, and she also has the same kit, and so we basically sat side by side on the sofa or outside in the garden enjoying the sounds of the birds, and we worked on our shawls together. And so I've done a little bit more since I showed this to you last time. I think I was in this section here, so I've completed the central colour work band, and I've done another one of these Vickle braids, and then I've moved into another linen stitch section. So it's a lot of fun because there are so many different techniques. It is really stretching me, but stretching me in good ways. I had never done a Vickle braid before, and certainly my Vickle braid at the beginning, which you can see there, has really very loose stitches, but my Vickle braid now is here. Can you see? And it's much neater. There's another one. So I'm really pleased with how I'm progressing in learning those techniques, and that they are neatening up and as I go along. And it's fine not to be perfect when we cast on something at the very beginning. Sometimes we have pieces which I think are learning pieces, which are really helping us to grow our skill set And I think this is definitely one of those, whilst being an exceptionally beautiful piece in and of itself. So each one of these stitches, stitch repeats that you're moving through, have kind of a different woven look to them. So like I said, we have this linen stitch section here, and then we move into this Vico braid, and then we have this transverse herringbone, then we have a bit of stranded colour work, and then we have some russamine. And russamine is basically when we are using floats on the outside of our work to create a particular design. And it's not like just reversed stranded knitting, because you are never actually knitting with this pink yarn. You are always knitting with the main colour, which is called Black Tahiti Purl. And this is corallus, this lovely coral shade here in the single ply. So you're never actually knitting that in the russamine, you're just bringing your yarn forward or back in order to create the strand. So there was like a few things that really stretched me. One was, like I said, I had never knitted a Vico braid before, and my stitches in the Vico braid, in the earlier braids, are much looser. And we learned, well, my mum showed me actually, she'd figured it out, that if you give your yarn a bit of a tug after you've passed your stitch from your right needle to your left, then that actually tightens up the whole braid, and you end up with a much neater look. So I started to do that as well, and that's really helped. Another skill that I've learned that I couldn't do before, or didn't know I could do before, is stranded colour work on the wrong side. I had only ever done stranded colour work in the round with the knit stitches, but I have now learned how to purl my stranded colour work. And I'm doing that by holding the yarn, both yarns, in my right hand, tensioning it both in front of my index finger and behind my index finger. And I shared on Instagram a little video of me doing that, not very clearly, because I find it very difficult to record myself knitting. I find it hard to get the right angle. I find it hard not to not to obscure what I'm doing, to show the action as clearly as possible. So I didn't do a terribly great job of showing that, but I did try. So yes, stranded knitting on the wrong side, and then of course there's been the russamine. Now most russamine tutorials that I saw online, they showed you how to do russamine in the round, but they didn't show you how to do russamine flat. Eventually I found, I think it was possibly a Russian tutorial, so I didn't know what I don't speak Russian, so I didn't know what anybody was saying. They did present it very clearly, and they didn't obscure their work. So I was able to see kind of what they were doing on that wrong side. And because one of my problems had been that my two strands from the right side and the wrong side were sitting too far apart, so they didn't create like a coherent design. One was sitting down here and one was sitting up here, so there was a big gap between them. So that really helped watching that little tutorial, because that showed me how to tighten that up. And part of what the problem was I was either holding my yarn above or below, and I needed to keep that consistent. So once I stayed consistent, surprise, surprise, my colour work got consistent. So it's a mirrored design, which means that half of the wrap is then repeated for the other side. So half would come to exactly here. So I am now just beyond halfway. I have started on my second skein of the main colour, which is good because that means I'm definitely going to have enough yarn to complete it. I'll just run you through the colours quite quickly. This main colour here is called Black Tahiti Purl. This neutral, the silvery speckle here, is called Driftwood. This one here is called Sun Glow, and this one here is called Corallus. Now, the Black Tahiti Purl and the Driftwood are both the same base. I think it's called the Luster base, which is a merino, mohair, silk and polyamide blend. The Sunglow is the feather base, and that is a merino nylon blend. And the Coralice is a single ply superwash merino. So that's one of the things I really like about neons and neutrals, and that's where this design features, is published in, is that they are not just exploring the contrast and the interplay between neons and neutral colour palettes, but they are also really experimenting with different textures and different bases. So as a collection that really allows you to explore what's in your stash and then, you know, utilise that, and because sometimes I think we go, oh, I have yarn that's single ply and I have yarn that's a high twist, so I probably can't use them in the same project if I'm trying to use up my scraps or trying to use up some of those stray skeins that we all have. But this book, I think, really kind of breaks down some of the barriers around using different bases in designs. So that's a lot of fun. And it feels very expansive in its potential and promise. So I had to take a little break because my neighbour started mowing the lawn. I tried to start again and it turned out it wasn't complete yet, so I'm crossing my fingers that it's all done now and I can continue on with recording the podcast. Since I took the little break, I've had a cup of tea, finished my tea, I have done some knitting, I've made myself another cup of tea, I've done some more knitting and I also took advantage of the break to go and find the book that I was just talking to you about. So here it is, Neons and Neutrals, curated by Amy Gilles, published by Lama. Hoef is the first design that I will have knitted from this beautiful collection, but there are a lot of others that I'm really, really interested in. One in particular is this one here, and this is Wervel, and this is by Micah van Gyn. And what I find so interesting about this is that it uses two different gauges. So you have a much tighter gauge in the yoke, and then a different yarn altogether and a different gauge for the body. So it's a much looser gauge for the body, so it goes much faster, and the yoke goes a bit slower when you're doing your colour work, and that's a bit of a denser fabric up here and then a looser fabric here. And you can see in this example, I think particularly, how well that works and how beautiful the drape is then on that. Another one that I'm interested in knitting is called Confluence, and it's by Caitlin Tarowski, and it's this one here. Now, quite often you see mohair being used alongside a fingering weight or a DK weight yarn in order to create a fluffy fabric, and it's less usual to see a different colour of mohair being paired with a different colour of fingering weight, a different colour of main colour. And so, but what Caitlin's done is she's put together, in this example, kind of this sort of oatmeal shade with this yellow. So it's knitted together through the body, and then it gets broken down at the sleeves and in the neckband and in the hem. You can see it again here in this blue and pink version. I really like that, this kind of breakdown in the ribbing. And then the other one that I wanted to show you that I'm also interested in knitting is this one here. It's a beautiful shawl by Julia Wilkins, and this is punked, and this combines a silk mohair with fingering weight for these dots. So it's intarsia, it's knitted with intarsia, which means that basically you're not carrying your yarn along the back like you would do with stranded. Instead, you're just using the fingering weight to create these little dots here. And so you don't have the strands running behind the sheer fabric. So I'm really interested in that because I think that it's going to help me unleash the potential that's in my stash. Now, a few months ago, I attempted to organise my stash, and I pulled out all the sweater quantities, so all the amounts that I'd put together for particular projects, mostly cardigans and jumpers, some shawls, but mostly garments. And then I got sick, so I really wasn't very well over the winter time, and I didn't have the energy to to deal with the stash. And so basically it's just continued being a very jumbled mess, and quite unwieldy to navigate when I'm trying to find stuff for a project. So that's all quite frustrating. But what it has really helped me to realise is that I have a lot of stray skeins and extra balls of yarn. So when you knit a project, you might find the same thing. I quite often have excess yarn at the end of that. And so, well, what do you do with that? If you're anything like me, you store it with the idea that you will use it someday, but for what? Well, I think a book like Neons and Neutrals helps us to figure out the what. A couple of other books I wanted to share with you, which are either recent or brand new. Actually, this one's pretty brand new. This is Knitted Fabric by Dee Hardwick. This is colour work projects for you and your home. And what I loved about her projects was that I thought I could really use them, like this, for example. I could really use up some of those extra balls of yarn and stray skeins if I just held them with like a neutral. So I've got quite a lot of cones, mostly of whole super soft, some of Woolyknit British wool 4-ply. So I could, for example, use some of those cones and then use some of my single skeins to do some of these colour work projects. So that feels like, again, unlocking the potential that's available in my stash, which I'm not quite managing to do at the moment. One last one, and it's one I've mentioned before, is Lerke Bagger's Close Knit. I think she's actually working on a second book right now, but she has so many wonderful ideas. And look at this. This is the bad idea blanket. She has so many great ideas for using up small amounts of yarn, and she's kind of zeroed in on like a couple of different sort of approaches and principles that she shares with you. And as an example of some of her yarn stash that she's collated and put together. These are scrap skeins that she then uses in some of her projects. Look at this. I love that. So yeah, I just wanted to share those three publications with you, because I think they are really helpful when you're trying to, work through some of those yarns in your stash that don't quite fit into like a garment or a larger quantity. So if you have any publication or pattern ideas that you kind of that you think fit the same bill, then I would love to hear those in the comments if you would like to share them. So, okay, I'm all discombobulated after the break. So what I'm going to share with you next, I think, is my half and half triangles wrap. Now, I haven't got a huge amount more done on this, but it really is my social knitting. Got it crammed in a bag here. So I'm using Woolyknit 4-ply, and I've started with this colour here, which is London Brick. This is one of their new colourways. It's a very warm reddish terracotta, I would describe it as. And this is my social knitting. So this is what I pull out, which is why it's got a little glass of wine on it. So I pull this out at knit night. I take it if I'm meeting up with friends. I quite often knit on it in the evenings. If we're watching anything that has subtitles, then it's an absolute must, because it is all just garter stitch. I've knitted, I've knitted 2 full ones before and part of a third. Because if you remember, I started to knit one for my daughter, but I was allergic to the dye in the Holst Super Soft for the colourway Slow. Not for any other colours, just for that one. So my best friend Jen decided that she would take the yarn off my hands and she would knit it, and she knitted most of the whole wrap and handed it back to me when there was about maybe 60 rows left or so of the second half. And I was not allergic to robin's egg, so which was the second colour. So we got that finished off and I gave that to my daughter and she wears it all the time. Since then, Jen has also knitted a half and half wrap for herself because she so enjoyed the process. So always good to have a convert. So I am working on this one. This is my first half. I'm doing my usual, which is I'm slipping the stitch, last stitch at the edge to create a smooth edge rather than the garter bumps. And instead of doing the wrap and turns, I'm doing German short rows. So pretty basic. This is my other colour that I'm pairing with it, which is Burgundy. So this is what the two look like together. You'll see quite similar to this really. So I really like these two colours together. I think this will be very wearable and I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that I could possibly have this finished so that I can bring it to Rhinebeck with me in October. But we'll wait and see whether that's a possibility or not. So, but that's just kind of like background knitting. It just kind of sits there and is like a constant. It's a comfortable piece that I can return to, and it fills in for those times when you don't have anything quite on the needles that's working for you in that particular moment. So for example, if I am watching the television or I do want to go to knit night or whatever it is, then I don't want to take a really complicated project that I'm going to have to refer to a chart and I'm going to have to, keep an eye on the whole time because that's going to take me out of the social situation. So in those situations, I think having this half and half to turn to is really helpful. So there we go. That's my half and half. Not a huge amount to say about that. Excuse the crinkling. I was working on this jumper when I showed it to you last in episode 38. It is Junko Okamoto's Plum. I am knitting it in Cowgirl Blues Merino Twist, Ginger Twist Studio in Pinup Sport Au Natural, and this here is Fonte Ombel. Now, do I have the label? I did have the label, but I don't think I have it now. Nope, I don't have it now. So I can't remember what the colour name is, but it is just a collection of numbers anyway. Like I said, all the details will be in the notes. But this is a merino wool, a mohair wool blend. So it's super, super fluffy. And the reason why I've done that is because the merino sport is not sticky wool, so it's not a wool I would naturally gravitate towards to do colour work, and that's because the stitches then kind of tend to sit apart from one another rather than creating kind of a coherent fabric, which is what you want for stranded colour work. You want to kind of create an even tension, and then the fibres within the stitches bond to one another and smooth it out. But you're not going to get that with merino sport, with this superwash merino here. So instead, I've used a fluffy yarn to kind of compensate for that. And so it's kind of creating a slightly different type of effect for the colour work, for the stranded. In the original pattern also, this secondary colour here was not used. You're just supposed to have like the main colour and this contrast colour. I have added in this other colour to create a kind of colour work band, because I'm not convinced that I have enough of the main colour to do the sleeves. So when I showed you this before, I was maybe about half an inch into the body after having split for the sleeves. The body has this cable design that runs right down and through the ribbing, and it's got a little bit of ribbing on either side, and it's quite difficult to see that because this yarn is so highly speckled. This is beautiful yarn from Cowgirl Blues, and it's in the colourway Under Pressure. I've got these wonderful rusty speckles, which I really wanted to pick up with this rusty mohair in the colourwork band. So it's got quite a deep rib and then cast off, and I'm really pleased with how it's looking. So I literally just have to do the sleeves. The thing about the sleeves, just as we've got this underarm detail here, on the underside of the sleeve you have the same detail. So it is going to require kind of setup and then kind of paying a bit more attention. And that will be fine once I get started, but I haven't quite started yet. I do think I'm going to get some wear out of this over summer, because even although we do get some warm days, like I've just mentioned about the Har, sometimes we have this thick sea fog that comes in and then it's really pretty chilly. So we do still have some cooler days, so I might still get some wear out of it over summer, but really I'm much more likely to get more wear out of it in the autumn winter. So maybe this could be a jumper that comes with me to Rhinebeck too. We'll wait and see. So not too much further to go on that one. So we're nearly there with that. What about socks? What about socks? So I knitted this. I have completed it. It is the Vapor Socks by Helen Stewart. That's her name. Curious Handmade. And she has brought out a couple of different sock societies, which have been like sock clubs, each containing about 5 or 6 patterns each. And this is one of the socks from one of her past sock societies. And like I said, it's called the Vapor Sock. It is kind of got this lace pattern that runs down the front. It's knitted cuff down. And this lace pattern here is offset from the central panel, which did cause me some difficulties in kind of figuring out exactly what was going on in each row and what I needed to do and what the repeat was. In her patterns, they're all written in a spreadsheet, which makes it very easy to keep a track of. But I was finding that I was still getting myself in a little bit of a confused mess, until I realised at the very back of the pattern there was actually a chart. So I checked out the chart, and that really helped me to visualise exactly what was going on with the repeat in the pattern. So these are knitted in My Mama Knits, and it's her merino. Gosh, I can't remember what the. Oh, actually, maybe I've got the label. Here it is. It's My Mama Knits. And it's Chufunga Superwash Merino Sock Yarn, 75% merino wool and 25% nylon, and it's in the colourway Golden Pears. I picked up 2 skeins of this at Bannock Yarn, which was a yarn festival in Stirling that only ran the once. I don't think it's returning. So yes, but I picked up 2 skeins of My Mama Knits yarn to knit 2 pairs of yellow socks. Yellow specifically because these are going to be donated to charity. Marie Curie runs a number of hospices in the UK, and there's a doctor who collects hand knitted yellow socks and then gives them out to all hospice patients at Christmas time. So I really meant to participate in this last year and it didn't happen. I am not much of a sock knitter. It's not something I really enjoy. I don't really like knitting on small circumferences. I have tried DPNs, I've tried short circulars, I've tried flexi flips. This is being knitted using magic loop. I just don't really like working on small circumferences, so that kind of counts socks out for me as a general rule, but I do knit them on occasion, mostly for other people. And so there we go. This is what I'm doing. So it's cuff down. I think we call this a heel flap and gusset, with the slip stitch detail at the back of the heel, and then we have my truly terrible Kitchener stitch at the end. For some reason, Kitchener stitch is not my forte. I think it's a tension issue. I think I'm not doing it quite tightly enough. But I have a question to ask you actually about that, because if you have any tips on how to improve my Kitchener stitch, that would be wonderful. I have done quite a lot of it, and I've done it on garments and I've done it on socks when I've had to, and it's not a technique that's unfamiliar to me, and yet I cannot get it to look neat. and it always looks a little bit messy, which is one of the reasons why this next project is still a whip and it is not complete yet. Now, I don't think I've shared this with you here on the channel. This is the Minster cowl by Linda Bjork Eriksdotter, who is Barbaknit on Instagram and here on YouTube as well. And it is a wonderful colour work cowl. So it's knitted as a tube, you can see here, and with a provisional cast on. You then work through 19 different stitch motifs, and some are based on old Icelandic and Scandinavian design, and others Linda has invented herself, which I really love because, you know, I think as knitters we are always in conversation with past makers, and I think this design here really articulates that very well and brings that together in a project that you can really enjoy knitting. And oh my goodness, I really enjoyed knitting this. There's something so engaging about seeing each one of these little motifs appearing on the fabric. Each motif is divided with this little design here of the dots to separate them. So each time I would get up to here and then I'd go, oh, I'll just do the dot pattern, and then I did the dot pattern, then it was like, oh, I'll just start the next motif. And then once I started it, I didn't want to stop it. So it was very engaging knitting and I really enjoyed it. I have washed and blocked this, so all that remains for me to do is to put my stitches here back on the needle, remove the yarn from my provisional cast on and put my stitches back on the needle here, and then Kitchener stitch it. So, do you have any advice on how I can improve and neaten up my Kitchener stitch? Because I love this. I really want to do it justice. I want to do it properly. I want the finishing on it to be really beautiful and the best I can make it. So if you do have some ideas, they would be very gratefully received. One other tip that I will give you about this is when I finished doing this first motif, it dawned on me that I didn't really need to catch my floats. So when we're doing stranded colour work, we quite often want to catch the long strands of yarn held at the back so that they don't catch on our jewellery when we're putting, or our fingers or whatever, when we're putting on the garment or the accessory. The floats for this accessory are all on the inside, and so you won't see them at all after this has been joined together in a loop. So I thought, well, why am I catching my floats then? I don't need to do that, so I just stopped doing it, and so I didn't do it for this particular motif. And it was only then that I realised actually that by catching the floats I was really ensuring that my tension remained even, and so my tension was affected through this particular motif by not catching the floats, because you can see in the next one I did start catching my floats again, and I think my tension's much better. So rather than ripping that back, it's just the story of the cowl, isn't it? It's the story of the piece, and it's part of the practice. So I just kept going and completed the rest of it. So, you know, it's a nice reminder for myself. It's a learning piece, and I'm really, really pleased with the overall look of the cowl. Now, because it is a tube, you've got like a double fabric, and also because it's stranded knitting, you've kind of got a thicker fabric than you would otherwise. My yarn is, let me see if I got the ball down here somewhere. No, I don't find it. I can't find it. The silver grey yarn is Lammermuir wool, which is from a company that's based only about 25 miles away from me. They have 2 flocks, I think, of Shetland sheep, and this yarn is made from their fleeces blended with another local flock of Gotland sheep. And so this was called the Hillfoots 4-ply, and unfortunately it's not available anymore because they do really produce yarn in quite low quantities because there's only so many of their sheep, obviously. And so yes, you need to buy it when you can find it. I found this at the Scottish Wool Producers Showcase back in 2022, the first one. And I got 2 skeins there, and I've used both of these skeins. I do have some left over, and I've combined it with a leftover skein of Hillesvåg Sollier in the colourway Cognac, which actually went into this wrap here, which you can kind of see in the background. This is the Quadrangle Spires by Stephen West, and I've knitted it all in Sollier, Hillesvåg Sollier. However, while I was away in France, my daughter came to stay over, and when I came back, this throw had been put on the wrong way round. So it's supposed to be like that. However, I actually quite like it, and it's kind of mixing things up a little bit, so I've just left it. She is staying over again tonight though, so maybe it'll get switched back then. I don't know. But I had 1 skein of Cognac left over. So I decided that I would knit these 2 together, and I really love how they look and how they've knitted up. They're both that sticky wool. I don't have the same issue as I do with my plum about making sure that my fabric is created kind of a smooth consistency and a coherent fabric. Coherent textile. I don't have to worry about that with this kind of wool at all. It's really very lovely and very good for that purpose. So, but yes, because it's knitted as a tube, and because it's a thicker fabric, because it's stranded knitting, and because it's this lovely warm rustic woolly wool, still very, very soft, I have to say. I don't think I'm going to get anywhere out of this now until later on in the year, because I think it's going to be incredibly warm. But I am wondering about the possibility and whether I have enough of the Hillfoots 4-ply to knit myself either a little pair of mitts, like fingerless mitts, or maybe a hat. So maybe I could get that done before the time comes to wear it. But yes, really, really pleased with this. I love this little dragon here. And actually, it was only afterwards when I was blocking it that I thought this kind of looks a bit like a swan from a distance. And I think of this as like a compass. So I just had a huge amount of fun with this one. Chickens. And also, you know, it's really given me, the pattern gives you all of these amazing stitch motifs. So then you could actually include some of those stitch motifs in other projects. So if I was going to do, you know, a matching hat, then I could possibly add some of the stitch, like maybe a favourite stitch motif to the hat or to the back of the mitt. Unfortunately, I won't be able to use any more of this this Cognac shade, because I think I had like the tiniest little amount left at the end of this project. So I won't be able to do any more colour work that looks the same as that. But like I said, it really is a lovely collection of stitch motifs to have and then to utilise in projects. So really impressed with the pattern. It's Linda's first pattern, and you wouldn't think that. I knitted this as part of, well, it's actually part of a read-along. So in my Patreon, I've been running a book club, and the book club is called The Nature of Memoir. And it's really about the intersection between nature writing, women's writing, and memoir. And the first book that we've been reading as part of that book club has been The Raven's Nest, which is by Sarah Thomas. Here it is here. And The Raven's Nest is basically about Sarah's relationship with Iceland, to the people, to the culture, to the language, to the land. And so we read this together as a group in my Patreon, and I put up prompts into self-reflection that you can then take into your making. And then alongside that, we've had a make-along, and the make-along has been called Inspired by Iceland. So you could make anything. It didn't have to be knitted. It could be a painting, it could be a weaving, it could be anything at all. Just something that you've made that's invested with your creativity. So inspired by Iceland, so it could be inspired by Icelandic design, it could be using Icelandic fibres, it could be picking up something specifically from the book or something that was sparked by the prompts into self-reflection. And I knitted this as part of that. And I actually had Linda agree to do a lovely little video interview with me about this cowl and about her own personal making in Iceland as an Icelandic designer. And I shared that on my Patreon as well. So if you do want to go in and support me over on Patreon, there are lots of rewards and different tiers, different entry points that you can engage with there. And so, I recommend that you go and have a wee look there. But at the very least, you can go and check out the free show notes there, because you'll see some photographs of this and you can get a bit of a closer look. So there we go. That's that. Is that all of my whips? No. Because there's this one beside me, which is what I've been working on while I was waiting for the mowing noise to stop. So this is a Sophie shawl by Petite Knit. I am knitting this in Lang Cloud. There we go, Lang Cloud. And this is superwash merino so it's 90% merino, 10% polyamide. And that's because it's one of these blown yarns. You see, it's kind of got a core and then it's got fibres that have been kind of blown through it. And this is what it looks like in the ball. Isn't that fabulous? So I was out for a lovely day out with Laura of the Knitting Posse podcast. She's currently living in Edinburgh. And so we went to the museum in Edinburgh in Chambers Street. There was a really lovely little exhibition there, which I mentioned, I think, in episode 38, featuring the textile designer's work, Bernard Klein. And it was finishing like a couple of days after we went to see it. So we popped in and checked that out. And then we walked over to Be Inspired because Laura wanted to get some sock yarn. While we were there, I saw this and I couldn't resist it, and I came home with a ball. Now, I had no plans really for it. I was thinking of possibly knitting another Saturday shrug with it, but I left it because obviously I was going away to France, and when I came back it was so grey and so cold and damp, and it was a bit of a tough re-entry, I'll admit. And I went into my craft cupboard where my stash is, and there was this ball of yarn that I had not put away yet, and I just thought, I'm just going to cast it on. It's everything I need right now. It is colour, it's soft, it's interesting because it's moving through all these colours. It's going to be engaging. I used my wooden tips because sometimes I think there's something very tactile about wooden needles, and there was something about this wool, this project, this moment that really made me think that this is actually what I wanted. I wanted the wooden tips, I wanted this yarn, and I wanted a really simple project. So the issue for me with casting on another Saturday shrug was that I have to pay a little bit more attention to that because I knit 1x1 rib in the round continental style, and I'm not a continental knitter. I do that because there's something about throwing in 1x1 rib that you have to keep bringing your yarn forwards and backwards over the front of the needle with your right hand, and something about that action sets up pain in my wrist, which then extends along my forearm. And so to avoid that, when I have to do a lot of 1x1 rib, I do continental knitting. But like I said, I have to pay more attention to continental knitting, and I can't just sit and watch something on the telly or, whatever we were watching. I'll tell you what we're watching just shortly. But so I decided just to do some garter. So I thought a really lovely viewer, and I'm completely blanking on your name, I'm really sorry, I'll pop it up here. A really lovely viewer purchased this pattern for me as a gift. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to cast on this Sophie shawl, and I'm really, really enjoying it. However, after I got to maybe about here, I realised that if I wanted to get the size of shawl that I really like to wear, or size of scarf even, that I really like to wear, I was going to need another ball. So I returned to Be Inspired. Unfortunately, May had some more balls in this particular colourway. And so when I got up to the middle point, which is this turquoise stripe here, that's when I ran out of the yarn, I think probably there. And then I have started the second ball here, and I'm now on my decreases. It's a very, very simple pattern. It's just a series of increases followed by a series of decreases just on one side. You've got the I cord on either side, which is a really lovely, neat finishing. A couple of things I would say about this yarn. I have been really enjoying it. I do really love the colour changes. I love the feel of it in my hands. I love the texture and fabric that it's creating. However, I have come across several breaks in the yarn that have been knotted in the ball, and I don't trust knots that I find in the ball, so I always break them, and if I can spit splice it, I will. This yarn will not spit splice. Ask me how I know. And so instead I have tied my own knots, which I completely trust. But I just left them in there because I kind of wanted you to see that. So we've got one here. I think there's more on the other side as well. There's one. And then there's one in at the side as well. So there's been about 4 or 5, and then there's been a couple more in this new ball as well. One here. And yeah, so there's another one. So that's been a little bit disappointing, but I guess, you know, it just happens with some particular balls of wool, doesn't it? Some particular brands or some particular lines within brands. The other thing I would say is that it is already doing it looks like it has a strong potential to bobble. So I'm not sure how this is going to hold up, but that said, it's just a delightful knit, and it's really fun, and it's everything that my soul needed at that particular moment. I needed colour, I needed softness, and I needed warmth, and this ticked all of those boxes. So the thing that I was watching while I was working on all of this was Sweet Tooth over on Netflix. And it was actually my husband's suggestion. He had read a review or an article or something about it. I think possibly because season 3 has just been commissioned, and season 1 and season 2 are already up on Netflix. So we watched the trailer for it, and I thought, this sounds really quite strange and a bit weird, and I'm not sure what to think about this, but okay, let's give it a go. It looks engaging and interesting. So and it absolutely was. We've been really enjoying it. In fact, I was in tears in the last episode, which is always a sign of something which has really kind of captured your imagination and your heart. So it's a post-apocalyptic narrative, which is kind of like after there's been a virus which has been very destructive on the human population, and alongside that, all the babies being born are some kind of hybrid between a human and an animal, a different animal for each child, it would seem so far. And we are following the story of one of these particular hybrids called Gus, who is kind of a boy and a deer. And it's just really very lovely and very hopeful and optimistic. And I'm just really, really enjoying it. It's quite redemptive as a storyline, with some of the particular characters in it. Yeah, it's just really lovely. So we finished the first season, and we are about to embark upon the second season. So yes, I'm enjoying that. the other thing that I've been enjoying, which is kind of I was like, I really don't know about this. Maybe this is something I need to remember for the future. if I feel particularly doubtful over something, maybe I should just give it a go anyway. Because we started watching the BBC show Ghosts. And basically it's made by the people behind Horrible Histories. I don't know if you know Horrible Histories. They were a series of books, I think, by Terry Deary. And they were then made into a children's TV show. And my children were absolutely obsessed with this show. This was one of their absolute favourites. They used to, they'll be mortified that I'm telling you this, but they used to do performances in front of extended family of the songs that were in Horrible Histories, because basically it was just one song after another where they would teach you something about history. It was always very good. It was always very well thought through and well written. So this the team behind that have created this show called Ghosts, which isn't for children. It's for adults, and it's basically about a couple who inherit an old family mansion in the English countryside. And she has an accident which then causes her to be able to see ghosts. And so then she meets the ghostly inhabitants of her home, and it's about their dynamic and each episode is about half an hour, and the ghosts are all from different time periods, and they have very funny interactions with one another. And there's a lot of comedy gold present in the dynamic between her being able to see ghosts and nobody else. So they'll show you the same scene from her perspective and then from somebody else's. So she'll see a very, very busy room, and the other person will just see her in the room. And it's that they play that off to good effect. But actually, again, it's become, in certain moments, it's become quite moving as well, because of course these ghosts have had very particular lives and interactions and narratives, and they're sharing their stories as well. So so it's very interesting. I'm enjoying it. It's good fun. It's funny. It's moving. It's different. So yeah, ticking all those boxes too. So that's what I've been watching, but I'm just going to share with you, just to wind up really, a couple of things that are new to me. I'm going to start with this because you've actually already seen this, but it's the Lama Simply Shetland 4-ply. I picked this up at the Scottish Wool Producers Showcase back in March, the second one up in Perth, and I got 2 skeins of this. It is 400 metres to 100 grams. It's in the colourway Shayla. It is undyed, and it is Shetland wool. It is so lovely and rustic, but it's really soft and very bouncy, like super bouncy. The skein is so much larger than it looks like it should be for being a 4-ply. I'm really excited by this yarn. In fact, I'm so excited by it, I purchased 2 more skeins because, like I said, there's limited quantities of these, so you really need to pick it up when you can. This is from the 2022 clip. You can go on their website, and when I was there last, when I was picking up some for me, there was still some left, but it is absolutely amazing yarn. It's, like I said, they're 25 miles from me, so they're in the Pentland Hills, just over towards East Lothian, so really not very far away at all. And I want to knit a big cosy cardigan by Andrea Murray to wear to Rhinebeck this year. And now you're probably thinking, big cosy cardigan. I've seen people at Rhinebeck absolutely roasting because it's turned out to be a very hot day. Well, it is knitted in a 4-ply, so it's not super thick like worsted weight jumper or anything. It's also knitted with a lot of positive ease, so it's not sitting really close to my body, so I can wear like a t-shirt or something underneath it and feel quite cool. Alternatively, if it is a bit colder, I can layer up. And it gets teamed with a beautiful shawl collar. Now, I actually have the yarn for the shawl collar, but I can't show it to you yet because it hasn't been launched yet by the dyer. So I am holding off on that, but as soon as that has been revealed, I will then show you that. But my idea was that I really wanted to showcase at Rhinebeck this local yarn, locally grown yarn in the Lama Muir, and then something which has been locally dyed. So being able to bring those two together in my garment for Rhinebeck felt very honouring and appropriate and lovely. So but I think there is like a lot of knitting in the big cozy cardigan, so I will have to cast that on quite soon. I don't want to cast it on while I've still got so much on my needles, so I do need to start clearing some of that off. But my hope is that by recording a little bit more often and shifting my focus away from production and back onto practice, that you can really kind of accompany me on the journey of completing these whips. Okay, I've got 2 more things to share with you and then I'm going to release you. The first is I was sent the 2 skeins of this Similapura by BC Garn. It is in the colour beige grey and it's 350 metres to 100 grams, so I've got 700 metres. And this is sent to me by UKnit over in Toronto, Canada. And the owner of UKnit is Claudia Quintanilla, and she's just bringing out, I think this weekend, a beautiful book published by Lina called Making Memories, Timeless Knits for Children. And I was contacted by UKnit and was asked if I would like to be sent a kit in order to knit one of the projects from that book and to share it with all of you. And so of course I said yes, because it is a beautiful collection. And so I had a little look through the patterns to see if there was one there that I thought would be a fun knit for me. And the very first project was the one that I am going to be knitting. And that is because that project is called Alex. And my nephew is called Alex. Alex is 3 years old, and so I'm going to be knitting, I think it's the size 3 to 4. It is a simple top-down raglan jumper with a little bit of texture detail around the neckline. It's super pretty and I think he'll look really lovely in it. So I'm going to be knitting that up over the next couple of weeks. Again, preferably after I've cast a few things off, but we'll see. So yes, I need to wind some of these. Also, I need to say my ball winder is still broken and I still have not replaced it. My Swift is still very much on its last legs. It's a very wonky Swift. So I need to replace that as well. And that has slowed me down, I think, in my wild abandon of casting on all the things, because it then means I have to wind by hand. So I should just stop swithering over it all and just make a decision and buy the winder at the very least. So anyway, that's I haven't done that yet, but once I do, I will be scanning up all of these and getting myself sorted for the upcoming knits. The last thing I want to share with you is something that just arrived yesterday, and Midwinter Yarns so Estelle is the wonderful woman behind Midwinter Yarns, and she recently announced that they were going to be moving up to Shetland and they weren't going to be doing yarn festivals anymore, and they were packaging together some wonderful Lithuanian linen mini skeins. So I really love Lithuanian linen, and I always buy my Lithuanian linen from Estelle at Midwinter Yarns. And so I jumped on this offering of a grab bag. So basically it was 20 mini skeins. Each skein has about 50 metres, so I have about 1,000 metres. And you didn't get to choose the colours or anything. The colours were put together for you, and they were just going to be a kind of a random selection. And so they arrived yesterday. I'm just trying to arrange them so you can see them. But this is them. Aren't they absolutely, completely gorgeous? I'm so happy with these, and they're so delightful. Now, I think that I might use these to make I think it's called Blouse 2 by Tina Russing. It's basically a lace top, a lace jumper, and with a detail on it of different colours. I'll put a photograph up, but it's very different. I'm not describing it terribly well, but I thought I could maybe use these linen mini skeins for the detail in that top. She also has the same stitch pattern for, I think it's a vest top, and for a couple of shawls. And so, yeah, I'm very tempted to do that with it, because I think that would be really lovely and very different. So I'm very intrigued by that, and kind of want to cast that one straight away too. And I won't, because as you can see, I have a ridiculous amount of works on the needles, and I just need to keep cracking with that. Okay, my darlings, I think that's probably more than enough for one episode. I hope you've enjoyed this kind of casual catch up. It is part of this kind of experiment over the summer to be a little bit easier and gentler with my podcast recording, not to be quite so formal and structured. I think it's become a little bit, I think my own podcasting has become a little bit more formulaic, a bit stuck in its generic expectations, so it follows a very particular form. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that does facilitate flow. I think it also creates comfort for the people watching it, because I think it's easy for you to recognise what's coming up and what's already been, and you understand the flow and the structure of the episode. So I don't think that is a bad thing, but I do think that by switching things up a little bit, it creates more intentionality. It creates conscious choice around my own making and around my own creative self-expression. And I think possibly it will pull this focus back from producing products and back onto the making practice itself. So that's the idea. We'll see how it goes, but that is you now all caught up as to what's on my needles, what I've been working on, and also what I'm thinking about casting on in the very near future. So next time I podcast, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, rather than leaving it quite so long, I'll be able to share with you where I'm at with all of that. But I'm going to leave you with a little bit of footage from a trip that I took at the beginning of April. And this is one of the problems with having slightly longer times between podcasts. It means that, there's things that have happened quite a long time ago now that I haven't been able to share with you. So my husband and I went on a trip to Craighead House up in, I think it's Stirlingshire. Is it Perthshire? It's just above Dunblane. And so it's really not very far from Edinburgh at all. It's very much still in the central belt, but it is very rural. Craighead House is a collection of self-catering little dwellings, and two of them have been kitted out and built actually as hobbit holes. So we stayed in a hobbit hole. It was a beautiful gift that my mum and dad gave us for our 25th wedding anniversary last November. And we purchased an extra night. So we stayed there for 3 nights. So I want to share with you some footage from that wonderful little break that we had from the Hobbit Hole that we stayed in, as well as the trip that we took to Callander to go to the Bracklinn Falls, which is a beautiful waterfall that we used to go to a lot when the kids were little and we lived in the area, but I haven't been back to it, gosh, for probably about 10-15 years. So it was really nice to return there, and I took lots of footage there too. So if you want to stick around for that, then I hope you really enjoy it, and I will see you all again really soon. Take good care.